Okay, we are the Labor and Work Culture RT, and we're going to start our presentation through the lens of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Our presentation starts from introducing general issues of work culture before COVID-19, including parental leave, gender inequalities, and the inequalities between non-regular workers and regular workers, etc. Afterwards, we will explain how these situations either showed up, changed, or were strengthened by COVID. As a wrap-up, we will suggest how the workplace would look like in the post-COVID era. First, we would like to start off with explaining some differences of work culture between the US and Japan. As listed on the table on the slide, we came to discuss the differences, such as how the US focus on individuals while Japan respect the peace of the group. How US companies tend to adopt the merit system, while Japanese companies adopt the seniority system, offering higher positions within the firm or higher wages to the elderly rather than for young workers. The existence of nomikais, which are after-work drinking parties with the workers, was viewed as a symbol of how close the workplace is to your private life. We also shared a view of how the generosity towards the introduction of gig work, which refers to a new work style for workers to utilize their free time to get work from contractors without belonging into a certain organization, differs between US and Japan as well. While it is said that 34% of the workforce in the US refers to gig work, in Japan only 17% does. As a whole, Japanese companies tend to share a trait of thinking themselves to be a life-supporting organ in a sense for the workers. They provide opportunities for the young to develop their skills, regardless of whether or not they are talented at first, and benefit those who show loyalty towards the company culture. Therefore, old customs which were developed by senior workers tend to last longer, such as hankos, and this has caused a controversy in terms of the adaptation to labor in the coronavirus era. On the other hand, companies in the US have a character of being a kind of platform for workers to express their talent, where people who have better abilities get more chances and reward rather than based on simply how long they have been working.
I would like to talk about telework trends. In the United States, telework was introduced since the 1970s, and after the 2000s, as the development of communication in digital technology, telework has been actively adopted in American society. The teleworking adoption rate of enterprises is highest in the world at 85%, and the teleworking population is about 20% of all employees. However, as a trend before the pandemic, some major companies such as Yahoo, Best Buy, IBM, etc. has limited or restricted telework because teleworking does not seem to deliver maximum performance in marketing departments that require creative collaboration in teams. After the pandemic, telework gets attention as part of measures, especially among the major tech companies. More flexible ways of working are being reviewed. In Japan, on the other hand, telework has introduced in the 1980s with reference to American telework. After the bursting of the bubble economy, the efforts for telework have decreased, but as the use of computers became more common in the early 2000s, it began to receive attention again. As Japan's working population declined, the government sought to promote telework in order to popularize various forms of labor participation, and the use rate has doubled in the 5 years before the corona pandemic. The adoption of telework has rapidly progressed due to the corona pandemic. It has risen to about 40% as of April 2020. However, the percentage has dropped to around 35% since the decline of emergency was cancelled. The trend toward decrease is likely to strong, so future trends are noteworthy.
Next, I would like to talk about parental leave. First, it's about Japan. Maternity leave can be taken from 6 weeks before giving birth until 8 weeks after the birth. About child care leave, mothers can take a year and paid at 67% of the regular salary for 6 months and then 50% after that. Let's move on to the United States. In fact, the US is the only industrialized nation that doesn't doesn't guarantee paid parental leave through federal law. The Family and Medical Leave Act mandates workers get 12 weeks unpaid parental leave. However, many had returned to work sooner than 12 weeks because they needed money or feared losing their jobs. Surprising to notice that President Trump signed a Federal Employee Paid Leave Act this year, which grants federal employees up to 12 weeks of paid time off. This graph shows the period of parental leave. In Japan, male employees can take 1 year of paid leave. However, despite the general system, only 7% of fathers in Japan took parental leave last year. The fact of there could be staff shortages, employers not offering it, and unfavorable atmosphere. Next, please. I will move on inequality brought by parent leave. So in Japan, we clearly see the inequality between non-regular workers and regular workers. Around 300,000 workers could take parental leaves in 2015. However, only 3.5% of non-regular workers could take parental leave. Additionally, more than half of non-regular workers were women. In America, 40% of employers said they now offer paid parental leave. However, America does not have governmental support system. Therefore, whether workers can get paid parental leave is up to their workplaces. And most cases, the time is not enough. In short, it seems the gap between the rich and poor and among races even gets bigger. Next, please.
An outdated working culture of gender expectations still exists to this day. Both in the US and Japan, women feel like they aren't trusted enough to take crucial roles that define their company's businesses. 42% of American working women have reported that they have experienced some type of discrimination based on their gender at work. 16% of women are regularly assigned repeated small slights at work. Similarly, in Japan, about a quarter of women employees feel they are assigned unimportant and repetitive tasks. This trend or expectation still exists because the stereotype of women being nurturing and supporting creates an expectation of them to support male workers behind the scenes. The exceeding numbers of female participation in household responsibilities creates this false imagery of them voluntarily supporting men. Next slide, please. Oftentimes, women have been enforced upon values too often that they naturally conform to expectations. The reason why this issue persists for so long can be credited to that, as the minority group simply follows the lead of the majority. Whistleblowing on authoritative figures is an important action to take and should continue, but we shouldn't be too obsessed with identifying the who, spending all our attention towards that. Rather, what is important is to address the next steps we can take to fix the issue, whether it is hosting workshops, restructuring departments, etc. Next slide, please. A near 40% of Japanese working women feel confident that housework responsibilities can be balanced with their work responsibilities. The freedom allotted between business meetings have allowed many women to utilize the extra time for housework. In addition, male participation of housework has also increased slightly due to shift of work environment. But in a post-COVID workplace, there's also 20% of women who are heavily concerned about their ability to sustain their job responsibilities and housework. This can be credited to two reasons. First being some companies have resisted transferring to a work from home structure, especially seen in Japanese companies due to their reliance on in-person communication. The second being employers aren't understanding of having to sustain housework, as they assume the extra time that used to be commuting can now all be allocated to work purposes. Although COVID has provided a safe environment for many working women, the extent to which it was able to restructure gender norms as a whole is still questionable. Next slide, please.
Now I'm going to talk about the relationships between working from home and our mental health. Well, first, please imagine what it would be like to work from home. Your office chair is your couch, your commute is the length of your hallway. Don't you think it's amazing? Well, there are, of course, lots of pros and cons of working from home, but now let's look at the positives first. Well, one of the hardest things about working in the office is that it prevents you from being able to handle almost anything else that comes up in your life, whether having a dentist appointment or picking up your kid from school. But when you work from home, there would be greater flexibility, and this sounds like an ideal working style. However, the reality is that several data show that the possibilities that you will feel stressed will be higher when you work from home. According to the survey, which was conducted last June in the United States, more than 50% of those who are working from home during this pandemic found themselves more stressed compared to when they were working in the office. But then, what is it that is creating this situation? Well, there are considered to be several reasons for this. Well, first, always-on culture. Even before the pandemic, it was quite common to be always on, making sure that we did not miss work calls and messages. And some respondents of the survey even claim that they are required to work anytime, even on weekends and public holidays, since the line between their professional and personal lives has blurred. Well, second, feeling of isolation. Well, you might not realize it until you're not there, but there is a lot of casual collaboration that happens in the office, whether it's a brainstorming session over lunch or just a casual conversation like what they are planning to do on weekends. And this lack of communications among coworkers can create a situation that your coworkers might accuse you of slacking. Well, when you work from home and can get to a call or email right away, your coworkers and your bosses may not be as forgiving as they might be in the office. Well, people might wonder if you're taking it easy rather than pulling your weight, which is so stressful for me, just imagine that. Well, what we have to keep in mind is that when we don't automatically run across people outside of those we live with, we can become lonely before we realize it. Well, if you feel isolated or frustrated with yourself, please make sure to share your feelings with others. And it's also important for both employers and employees to remember that working from home during a pandemic is vastly different than usual and can cause a lot of pressure and stress for some people.
I will be talking about the effect of COVID-19 had on an unfortunate unemployment rate in America and Japan. For America, I will be comparing the effect of unemployment between people of color and white people. For unemployment in America, it is at a 10.2% as of July. If you can see the orange and blue graph, you will see that the unemployment in May of 2020 was higher for people of color after COVID-19 hit. There is a higher risk of POC to get infected due to the lack of health insurance, occupations, less social distancing, and underlying conditions. Asian Americans are 1.3 times more likely to get affected compared to whites. Black and brown communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 also. There are many workers of color that are holding essential jobs due to the shutdown. They had to resort to unemployment. Moving on to Japan and the difference of unemployment between foreigners and Japanese. In the Mie prefecture, it was more likely to let go foreigner workers. Some of the reasons this can be is because of the weaker support network, language barriers, and foreign workers usually do not turn to the government for help. Although there are not an explosion in unemployment during the pandemic, it still reached a 2.9% for unemployment.
So what does life in a post-COVID-19 world look like? Let's find out. The US can expect healthcare to be a very important and highlighted topic in politics, and even more so at the center of elections as a result of the pandemic. We predict a world of increased activism and demand for the government to step in and fix what is a systemic oppression problem in the country. In the US, 43% of Black and Latino workers are employed in service or production jobs that is for the most part that cannot be done remotely, and they make up most of our essential workforce, such as grocery store workers and factory workers. Only about 1 in 4 white workers held such jobs. Latinx people between the ages of 40 and 59 have been infected at 5 times the rate of white people in the same age group. In terms of Japan, we predict a shift in family relationships and work culture. Although 63% of businesses project pessimistic outcomes for their companies, many are finding new ways to work remotely despite the Japanese culture of working with others in person and engaging in drinking parties with coworkers. It is critical for Japan's economy to digitize, and it has become very important as the country's low birth rates and rising life expectancy have reduced the domestic workforce, those aged 15 to 64 years old, to only 59.7% of the total population. Even with more efforts to hire women and foreign workers, this demographic change threatens to stall GDP growth for the next decade, but there is potential. Household responsibilities are also being more distributed equally amongst husbands and wives, and many fathers are participating more in raising their children. The rest of the world will change in terms of travel. As a vaccine is hopefully developed soon, it may be a requirement for passengers to enter into countries. For example, an immunity passport indicates a form of documentation given to those who have recovered from COVID. The ideal will likely be explored and implemented further to promote normalcy. Healthcare workers are experiencing burnout from working long hours, and this trend is expected to continue worldwide. Overall, the world will adapt to new habits. Delivery workers are expected to increase in demand as more people stay home and have things delivered to them. Technological advancements and knowledge will need to be more accessible. We hope that people will be able to make the best of their home and work environments during these times of social distancing.